She once got kidnapped by the Mafia boss, and he can't seem to let her go. Grace Monroe would later say the worst night of her life began with the smell of gasoline and the sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She woke up in the dark, with her wrists zip-tied behind her back, sitting upright in a metal folding chair, her mouth dry, her head throbbing where something had hit her. She could hear men talking low and fast in Spanish somewhere behind her, the words sliding past too quickly for her to catch more than a fragment here and there. A door creaked, boots on concrete. Someone fell off. Water dripped in a slow, patient rhythm, like the building itself was counting down to something. She had locked up her flower shop at 9 p.m., like she did every single night. She remembered the bell over the door, the smell of lilies, the ache in her feet. She remembered walking to her car in the alley behind the shop, because the street lamp out front had been broken for a month, and the city never fixed anything on that side of Miami. She remembered a van pulling up too close, too fast, and a hand clamping over her mouth before she could scream. She did not remember anything after that, and now she was here, wherever here was, blindfolded and shaking, and somewhere close by, a man's voice cut through the dark like a blade through silk. "Take it off," the voice said, calm, unhurried, the kind of calm that made her stomach drop harder than any shout could have.
"Let me see her face." The blindfold came off in one rough pull, and Grace blinked against the sudden light, and the first thing she saw was him. He was standing maybe 10 feet away, hands in the pockets of a suit that cost more than her shop made in a year. Dark hair cut close and precise, a jaw so sharp it looked carved rather than grown. His eyes were black, not dark brown, not hazel, actually black, like something in them had burned out a long time ago and never grown back. He was looking at her the way a man looks at a puzzle piece that doesn't belong to the puzzle in his hand. "That's not her," he said, and his voice had gone flat and cold in a way that made the two men flanking him go rigid. "Boss, the address matched, the description matched. That is not Elena Vasquez." He said the name like it tasted bad in his mouth. His eyes had not left Grace's face. "Who is this woman?" Nobody answered him, because nobody knew, and Grace realized with a jolt of fury underneath her fear that these men, whoever they were, had grabbed the wrong person off a dark street and had absolutely no idea who she actually was. "My name," Grace said, and her voice came out steadier than she expected, steadier than she had any right to feel with her wrists bound and her pulse hammering in her throat, "is Grace Monroe. I own a flower shop 3 doors down from wherever you meant to be, and you have about 10 seconds to explain why I'm tied to a chair before I start screaming this warehouse down." Something shifted behind the black of his eyes. Not fear. She would learn, much later, that this man did not know how to be afraid, but something closer to interest, sharp and sudden, like a blade catching light. "She has spirit," he said quietly, to no one and everyone at once. Then, to the men who had taken her, "Get out." They left, and Grace Monroe was alone in a warehouse with a stranger who had just realized his men had kidnapped the wrong woman, and instead of letting her go, he pulled a second folding chair across the concrete floor, sat down across from her, and studied her face like he intended to memorize it. "You are not leaving tonight," he said. Grace's whole body went cold. "Excuse me?"
"You saw my men's faces. You heard them say a name. You are sitting in a building that does not exist on any city record, talking to a man whose name you do not know." He said it without cruelty, almost gently, which somehow made it worse. "If I let you walk out that door right now, you become a liability to people far less patient than me. So no, tonight you are not leaving." "You cannot just keep me here." "I can," he said, "and I am." And that was the exact moment Grace Monroe understood, with a clarity that turned her blood to ice, that she had just become the property of the most dangerous man in Miami, and he had absolutely no intention of letting her go. His name, she learned over the following hour of tense, furious silence, was Rafael Castillo, and the men who worked for him did not say his name so much as they flinched around it. He had her moved from the warehouse to a black SUV with tinted windows so dark she could not see her own reflection, and from there to a mansion on the water so large it looked less like a house and more like a small fortress that had learned to disguise itself with palm trees and white stucco. They did not speak in the car. Raphael sat across from her, one ankle crossed over his knee, watching the city slide past the window with a kind of stillness that made her nerves scream even louder than his men's guns had. When they finally arrived, a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and tired, kind eyes met them at the door, took one look at Grace's bound wrists, and made a sound of sharp disapproval in rapid Spanish that even Raphael seemed to wilt slightly under. "Cut her hands free, Rafael Castillo," the woman said in accented English, arms crossed, "before I do it myself with the kitchen scissors." He cut the zip tie without a word. Grace rubbed her raw wrists and glared at him with every ounce of fury she had left in her exhausted body. "This is Rosa," Raphael said, as if that explained anything at all. "She will show you to a room. You will not be harmed." "You kidnapped me." "My men kidnapped the wrong woman," he corrected, with the maddening precision of someone for whom the distinction actually mattered. "I am simply the one keeping you alive until I can fix their mistake safely."
"And how long is that going to take?" For the first time, something almost like uncertainty crossed his face, there and gone so fast she almost missed it. "I do not know yet," he admitted. "Until then, you will stay here. You will be safe. You will not be touched." "That is not a comfort." "It should be," Raphael said quietly, "because where you were supposed to go tonight, safety was not part of the arrangement." He turned and walked away before she could ask what that meant, and Rosa led her up a wide marble staircase to a bedroom bigger than her entire apartment, and Grace Monroe sat on the edge of an unfamiliar bed in an unfamiliar mansion belonging to an unfamiliar dangerous man, and cried for exactly 4 minutes before she made herself stop, because crying had never once solved a single problem in her 28 years of hard living, and she was not about to start believing it would now. She had survived worse than this. She had survived losing both her parents in a car accident when she was 19, survived raising her younger brother Danny alone on a florist's salary while other girls her age were finishing college without a single real responsibility, survived every landlord and every unpaid bill, and every night she went without dinner so Danny could eat. She had survived by refusing every single time to let the world convince her she was small. She was not about to let one cold-eyed mafia boss be the thing that finally broke her. But 3 floors below, standing at the window of his study with a glass of untouched whiskey in his hand, Rafael Castillo was staring out at the dark water beyond his property line and thinking about the fire in a stranger's eyes when she threatened to scream his warehouse down, and wondering, with a discomfort he had not felt in longer than he could remember, why he could not stop thinking about it. The first 3 days passed in careful, hostile silence.
Grace refused to eat with him. She refused most conversation entirely, spending her hours pacing the length of her room, testing windows that did not open, memorizing hallways during the brief supervised walks Rosa allowed her, searching, quietly, patiently, for any weakness in a house built by a man who clearly did not believe in leaving weaknesses. She found none. What she found instead, without meaning to, was Raphael. She found him on the 4th morning, standing alone in the kitchen at 5 a.m., still in yesterday's shirt, dark circles under those black eyes, staring at a cup of coffee like it owed him an explanation. He looked up when she entered, and for one unguarded second, before the cold control slid back over his face, she saw something raw underneath it, exhaustion, and something that looked almost like grief. "You do not sleep," Grace said. It was not a question. "Neither do you," he said. "I hear you pacing every night. Room 4B has old floorboards. Every step over the east side creaks." She flushed, embarrassed at being caught, and covered it with irritation instead, because irritation was safer than anything else she might have felt standing in a kitchen at 5 a.m. with a man who apparently listened for her footsteps in the dark. "Maybe I pace because I'm being held prisoner in a stranger's house. You are not a prisoner. I can't leave. That makes me a prisoner, Raphael, whatever polite word you want to use instead." He set the coffee down slowly, and when he looked at her this time, something in his expression had shifted,
Not softened exactly, but sharpened into something more honest. You want the truth? I would love the truth. Nobody in this house seems to know how to give it to me. The truth, Raphael said, is that the woman my men were sent to collect, Elena Vazquez, witnessed something 3 weeks ago that got 2 of my men killed and nearly got me killed as well. The people responsible believe she can identify them. They want her dead before she can talk to anyone.
My men grabbed you from the wrong address in the wrong building because you happen to resemble her enough from a distance and a bad photograph that nobody checked twice. He paused. If I release you back into that neighborhood tonight and the people hunting Elena see your face circulating anywhere near where she should have been taken, they will assume you are her or that you know something about her. They will not ask questions before they act. Grace's stomach turned to ice. So I'm not just inconvenient to you. I'm a target because of a mistake your men made. Yes. And you're keeping me here because it is the only place in this city right now where I can guarantee you stay alive, Raphael said, quiet and absolute. And because it is my fault you are in danger at all, whether my hands did it directly or not. I do not walk away from a mistake I created, not even this one. For the first time since the warehouse, Grace looked at him, really looked, and saw not a monster, not simply a cold and dangerous stranger, but a man carrying the weight of a mistake he refused to set down. It terrified her more than his coldness ever had, because coldness she could hate cleanly. This flicker of conscience buried under all that ice, she did not know what to do with at all. How long? She asked quietly. Until it's safe. I do not know, Raphael admitted. But I promise you this, nothing happens to you in this house, not while I am breathing. Neither of them noticed Rosa standing in the doorway, watching the exchange with an expression that hovered somewhere between worry and something that looked dangerously close to hope. 2 weeks became her new, strange normal. She learned the rhythms of the house, Rosa's early cooking, the quiet rotation of armed men at the gate who never met her eyes, the particular silence that fell over every room when Raphael entered it, like the whole house exhaled and held its breath at once. She learned, slowly and against every instinct telling her not to, small, true things about him. That he drank his coffee black because his mother used to add too much sugar, and some habits die harder than the person who taught them.
That he had not slept a full night since his father was murdered 4 years ago, in a hit that put Raphael, at 28, in charge of an empire he had never asked to inherit. That underneath the tailored suits and the black, unreadable eyes was a man who had buried his father, watched his mother's health collapse from grief within a year, and taught himself to feel nothing at all, because feeling things in his world got people killed. You didn't choose this life, Grace said one evening, the two of them alone on the back terrace while the Gulf turned gold and pink at sunset, a truce neither of them had officially declared, but both had quietly accepted. No, Raphael said. I chose to protect what was left of my family instead of watching outsiders tear it apart the way they tore apart my father. There is a difference, even if the world outside does not see one. Do you ever think about walking away from it? Something flickered across his face, there and gone so fast she nearly missed it. Every day, he admitted, so quietly it barely qualified as a sound at all. And every day, I remember that men like me do not get to walk away. We only get to choose how carefully we hold on. Grace did not have an answer for that. So instead, without entirely deciding to, she reached over and set her hand lightly over his on the stone railing between them. And Rafael Castillo, who had not let anyone touch him with anything but violence or business in 4 years, did not pull away. Neither of them said a word about it, but something between them had shifted. Quiet and undeniable, like a lock turning somewhere deep inside a door neither of them had admitted was closed. And 3 floors below the terrace, hidden in the shadow of the garden wall, Rafael's cousin and second-in-command, Salvador Castillo, watched the two of them together with narrowed eyes and a phone already halfway out of his pocket.
Because Salvador had plans for this empire that did not include a soft-hearted florist making his cousin weak enough to bleed.
You have lost your mind, Salvador said the next morning, slamming a folder down on Raphael's desk hard enough to rattle the penholder. An outsider, in this house, sleeping under this roof for 2 weeks while Elena Vasquez is still out there and Los Fuentes are still circling like sharks that smell blood in the water. Grace stays, Raphael said, without looking up from his laptop, until it is safe for her to leave. Safe, Salvador laughed, sharp and humorless. You mean until you decide you cannot stand to let her go. I see the way you look at her, Primo. Everyone in this house sees it. It is a weakness, and weaknesses get men like us killed. Raphael's hands went still on the keyboard. When he finally looked up, his eyes had gone flat and dangerous in a way that made even Salvador take a half step back. Careful, Raphael said, low and even. You forget yourself. I forget nothing. I remember exactly what happened to your father the moment his enemies realized there was something, someone he would sacrifice everything to protect. I am trying to keep this family from making the same mistake twice. Grace has nothing to do with this family's business. She has everything to do with it the moment Los Fuentes find out she exists, Salvador snapped. And they will find out, Raphael. Things like this always find their way out. The only question is whether you deal with it before they do, or whether we all pay for your softness the way we paid for your father's. He left without waiting for a response, and Raphael sat alone in his study for a long time afterward, staring at nothing, his cousin's words settling into his chest like something cold and sharp that would not dissolve. He did not know, sitting there, that Salvador had already made a phone call 3 nights earlier that would change everything. A call to a man on the other side of a war Raphael did not yet know had reignited. Offering information in exchange for a seat at a table, Salvador had decided he deserved more than his cousin ever had.
The jealousy arrived on a Tuesday, dressed in red silk and diamonds, and her name was Camila Reyes. Grace heard the front door before she saw her, the particular sound of confident heels on marble, a woman's voice pitched to Carrie, warm and familiar in a way that made something in Grace's stomach tighten before she even understood why. Rafael Castillo, Camila said, sweeping into the sitting room where Grace had been reading, kissing both of Raphael's cheeks with the easy intimacy of long history. You look terrible. Are you sleeping at all these days? Camila. Raphael's voice had gone careful in a way Grace had never heard it go careful before. Not cold, not warm, something guarded in between. I was not told you were coming. Your mother invited me. She thinks it is time we finally discussed the wedding properly instead of dancing around it for another year. Camila's eyes slid, sharp and assessing, to Grace on the couch. And who is this? A guest, Raphael said. How interesting. Camila's smile did not reach her eyes. I did not realize you kept guests who look at you like that, Raphael. Grace felt her face heat and hated herself for it. I should let you two talk, she said, standing quickly, but Camila's voice followed her to the door, light and precise as a blade.
Raphael and I have been promised to each other since we were 16, Camila said. Not to Grace exactly, but clearly meant for her ears. Our families built an alliance on that promise. I would hate for anyone in this house to mistake a temporary arrangement for something it will never actually become. Grace did not answer. She walked out with her spine straight and her hands trembling only once she was safely around the corner, and she told herself fiercely that it should not have hurt as much as it did, that she had no claim on a man who had kidnapped her by mistake and kept her prisoner out of guilt. Whatever softness had grown quietly between them on a terrace at sunset. She told herself that all the way up the stairs, and she almost believed it, right up until she heard raised voices behind Raphael's study door an hour later and could not stop herself from pausing to listen. You cannot keep pretending this arrangement with Camila does not exist, his mother's voice said, tight with worry. This family needs the alliance her family brings. Your father built half of what we have on partnerships like that one. You have obligations, Raphael, whether you want them or not. I know my obligations. Do you? Because Salvador tells me you have been distracted, that there is a woman in this house who has nothing to do with any of it, and you are letting her get close enough to make you forget what is actually at stake. There was a long, heavy silence. Grace has nothing to do with the alliance, Raphael said finally, his voice low, and she will not be discussed like she is a problem to be managed. Then you had better decide quickly which promise you intend to keep, his mother said, because you cannot keep both, mijo, not without losing something you cannot afford to lose. Grace backed away from the door with her heart hammering and her chest aching in a way she refused to name, and did not sleep at all that night, not because of fear this time, but because somewhere underneath all her careful walls, she had let herself start hoping for something with a man who apparently already belonged, in every way that mattered to the people around him, to someone else entirely. She found the folder 3 days later entirely by accident, while looking for a pen in the study Raphael had told her she was welcome to use whenever she wanted. It was sitting beneath a stack of shipping manifests, her own name typed neatly across the tab, and once she saw it, she could not make herself look away.
Inside was everything: her parents' accident report, her brother's tuition records, and the exact amount still owed on his student loans. Old photographs of her flower shop's original lease, going back to before she had even taken it over. Bank statements that were not hers to see, dated only 2 weeks after the night she had first arrived at this house. Her hands were shaking by the time Raphael found her standing in the doorway of his own study, the folder open in her hands, her face pale with a fury that had nowhere safe to land. "You investigated my entire life," she said, before he could speak. "My parents, my brother, my debts. While I was locked up here not knowing if I would ever go home, you were digging through every private piece of who I am like I was a file to be managed. Grace, was any of this real?" Her voice cracked. "The terrace, your hand under mine. Was I ever anything to you except a problem you were quietly cataloging, the same way you catalog every other liability in this house? I needed to know if you were a danger to this family," Raphael said, and for once his composure had genuinely slipped, something close to desperation bleeding into his voice. "That is the truth, and I will not insult you by pretending otherwise. In the beginning, that folder was protocol. Every person who enters my life gets investigated. It is how men like me survive. And after the beginning, he was quiet for a long moment. After the beginning, he said, I kept updating it because I could not stop myself from wanting to know everything about you. Your brother's tuition is 3 payments behind. I paid the 4th one myself last week, anonymously, because I could not stand the thought of you lying awake worrying about it while you were trapped here because of me. That is not a man cataloging a liability, Grace. That is a man who has run out of ways to pretend he does not care." Grace stared at him, the folder still trembling in her hands, torn between the anger that had brought her to his door and the ache blooming underneath it at the thought of him quietly, secretly, making sure her brother never lost another semester because of a mistake that was never Danny's to pay for. "You should have told me," she said finally. "Quieter now." "You are right. I should have." Raphael crossed the room slowly, stopping close enough that she could see the honesty in his face, raw in a way she had not seen from him before. "I am not good at this, Grace. I have spent 4 years making sure nothing and no one could get close enough to matter, because every single time something has mattered to me in this life, it has been taken from me by force. I do not know how to want something without also quietly preparing to protect it from every direction at once. That is not an excuse. It is simply the truest thing I know how to give you right now." Grace set the folder down slowly on the desk between them, some of the fury draining out of her, replaced by something far more complicated and far more dangerous to her carefully guarded heart. "No more folders," she said. "No more finding things out about my life before I get the chance to tell you myself. If we are going to be honest about anything happening between us, it starts there." "Agreed," Raphael said, and meant it so plainly that she believed him. No more folders. It was not quite a resolution. It was not quite forgiveness either. Not fully, not yet. But it was the first time either of them had used the words "between us" out loud, without flinching away from what they meant. And something about that small, terrifying honesty, settled deeper into Grace's chest than any apology could have. The betrayal, when it came, arrived disguised as an ordinary Thursday. Grace was in the garden with Rosa, learning the names of flowers she had never seen outside of Florida, when the first gunshot cracked through the quiet, like the sky itself had split open. Rosa grabbed her by the arm and pulled her down behind the low garden wall, and for one terrifying, endless minute, the only sounds were shouting in Spanish, more gunfire, and the frantic thud of Grace's own heart trying to climb out of her throat. Raphael found him 30 seconds later, a pistol in his hand, blood on his sleeve that did not appear to be his own, his eyes scanning Grace from head to toe with a desperation he made no attempt to hide. "Are you hurt?" I'm fine. What is happening?" "Los Fuentes," he said, hauling her up and pulling her toward the house with a grip that would have bruised if either of them had cared.
"They breached the East Gate. They should not have known this address existed." They made it inside as more shots echoed behind them, and Raphael shoved Grace into a reinforced safe room off his study, his hands shaking, actually shaking, for the first time since she had met him, as he checked the lock twice. "Raphael, someone gave them this address," he said, and his voice had gone somewhere cold and terrible that frightened her more than the gunfire outside. And in that single sentence, delivered through gritted teeth while chaos exploded on the other side of a reinforced door, Grace understood with sick and sudden clarity exactly how deep the danger around her had actually grown, and exactly how little time either of them had left before it swallowed them both whole. The attack was repelled within the hour, 3 of Los Fuentes' men killed, 2 of Raphael's own wounded, and by midnight the house had gone eerily, deceptively quiet again. It was Rosa, of all people, who found the proof, a burner phone tucked inside Salvador's jacket pocket while she gathered laundry from his room, still open to a text thread that made her sit down hard on the edge of his bed and press a trembling hand over her mouth. She brought it straight to Raphael. He read the messages twice, his face going through disbelief, then fury, then a stillness far more dangerous than either. Weeks of contact, coordinates, security schedules, a payment already wired into an account under a name that was not Salvador's, but close enough to trace back to him with 3 clicks. "He sold us out," Raphael said, very quietly, staring at the screen like it might rearrange itself into something less true if he looked hard enough. "My father's own brother's son. He sold this family out for a seat at Los Fuentes' table." He found Salvador in the wine cellar an hour later, calmly pouring himself a drink like the house had not nearly burned down around them both that same night.
"You should have taken the deal I offered you last month," Salvador said, without turning around. "Step back. Let me run the business side while you play protector to your little florist. Instead, you made me choose between loyalty to a cousin who is losing his grip and a future that actually secures this family's survival. You nearly got Grace killed." "Grace," Salvador said, finally turning, something almost pitying in his expression, "was never supposed to survive tonight at all, Raphael. That was rather the point. Remove the distraction and you come back to yourself, or did you think Los Fuentes broke through that gate by accident?" The room went very, very still. "You targeted her," Raphael said, and his voice had dropped to something Grace, listening, frozen from the cellar doorway where she had followed against every warning Rosa had given her, had never heard from him before. Something final. "I targeted the weakness," Salvador said. "She simply happened to be wearing it." Grace did not see what happened next because Rosa pulled her bodily away from the door before it could happen, but she heard the sound that followed. Not a gunshot, but something colder, more controlled, the particular silence of a man making an irreversible decision with his own 2 hands rather than a weapon. And she understood, standing frozen in a hallway with Rosa's arms wrapped tight around her shaking shoulders, that whatever Rafael Castillo had just become in that cellar, he had become it because of her. And she did not know in that moment whether to run from that truth or run straight toward it. He came to find her an hour later, blood no longer fresh on his hands, but the weight of what he had done still heavy and visible in every line of his face.
He found her in her room, sitting on the edge of the bed exactly where she had sat that very first terrifying night. And for a long moment, neither of them said a single word. "Salvador is no longer a threat to this family," Raphael said finally, "or to you. You killed him." "Yes." Grace's whole body was shaking, though whether from fear or something far more complicated than fear.
She could not entirely say, because of me, because he betrayed everything my father built, because he nearly got you killed to prove a point about weakness. Raphael crossed the room slowly, kneeling in front of her so their eyes were level, something raw and unguarded finally breaking through every wall he had built around himself in 4 years of grief and control. He was wrong, Grace, about all of it. You are not a weakness. Then what am I? You are the only thing in 4 years, Raphael said, his voice breaking in a way she had never once heard from him, that has made me want to survive this life instead of simply enduring it. I told myself I kept you here because it was my responsibility, my mistake to fix. That was true in the beginning. It has not been true for a long time now. Grace's breath caught somewhere in her throat, tears rising hot and sudden. "Raphael, I know what I am," he said quietly. "I know what this family is, what this life will always cost the people who stay close to me. I have no right to ask you to want any part of it, but I am asking anyway, because I am done pretending Camilla's arrangement, or my mother's alliances, or 4 years of grief matter more than what I feel every single time you walk into a room and the entire house exhales at once." His hand found hers, trembling slightly, warm despite everything the night had cost him. "I do not want to let you go, Grace Monroe. I never have, not from the very first night, when I should have released you the moment I realized my men's mistake, and instead I found every reason in the world to keep you close instead." Grace stared at him, this cold, dangerous, grieving man who had just killed his own cousin to protect her, who had built 4 years of armor around a heart he had convinced himself did not still work. And she understood, with a clarity that terrified and steadied her all at once, that somewhere in these strange, impossible weeks, she had stopped being his prisoner and started being exactly where she was choosing, with open eyes, to stay. "I should hate you," she whispered. "I know. I should have run the second that gate was breached tonight, and never looked back. I know that too." "I don't hate you," Grace said, tears spilling freely now. "And I am not running, which terrifies me more than anything that has happened in this house since the night you kidnapped me by mistake." Raphael's hand came up slowly to cup her face, thumb brushing away a tear, with a gentleness that seemed almost impossible from a man who, an hour earlier, had ended his own cousin's life without hesitation. "Then stay," he said, "not because you have nowhere else to go, not because it is not safe outside these walls yet. Stay because some part of you, however small, wants to be exactly here." "That part," Grace admitted, laughing through her tears, "stopped being small about a week ago, and I have been terrified of it ever since." When he kissed her, it was slow and careful, like a man who had spent 4 years forgetting how to want anything gently finally remembering, and Grace Monroe, who had survived every hard thing life had thrown at her by refusing to let it make her small, let herself, for the first time in longer than she could remember, be completely and helplessly wanted in return. The weeks that followed were not simple, because nothing about loving a man like Rafael Castillo was ever going to be simple. Camilla's engagement was formally, publicly dissolved within days, her family's alliance renegotiated on purely business terms that no longer required a wedding to secure it, a conversation Raphael had with his mother behind closed doors that Grace never fully heard the details of, though she noticed, afterward, that his mother started looking at her with something that had shifted from suspicion into something far more careful and considering. Elena Vasquez was found safe 3 weeks later, relocated quietly out of the state under protection Raphael arranged personally. The danger that had started this entire impossible story, finally fully resolved. Los Fuentes, weakened by the loss of their inside informant and the very public, very final message Raphael's response had sent through every corner of the city's underworld, retreated to lick their wounds and did not test his territory again. Danny came to visit 2 months later,
nervous and overwhelmed at the size of the estate, and left 3 days after with a full scholarship offer to finish his engineering degree that Grace suspected, though she never asked outright and Raphael never confirmed, had not been entirely a coincidence.
"You didn't have to do that," she told him one evening, on the same terrace where it had all quietly begun, the gulf turning gold and pink exactly like it had that very first night she let herself touch his hand. "I know," Raphael said. "I wanted to. That's becoming a pattern with you. Only for the things that actually matter," he said, and pulled a small velvet box from his jacket pocket with hands that for once were not entirely steady. "Grace Monroe, you did not choose to walk into my life. My men made a mistake that should have cost you everything, and instead it gave me something I did not know I was still capable of wanting after everything this life has taken from me. I am done pretending I could ever let you go. I do not want to. I never have." He opened the box, and the ring inside caught the last of the sunset light. "Stay with me, not as a mistake I am fixing, not as a prisoner in a house you cannot leave. Stay because you choose this, choose me, exactly the way I have chosen you every single day since a warehouse full of armed men brought you to me by accident, and I could not make myself let you walk back out that door." Grace laughed and cried at the exact same time, the way she had on the night everything between them finally became honest, and said yes before he had even finished the question. Because some things she had learned, in this strange and terrifying and impossibly beautiful turn her life had taken, were worth saying yes to with your whole shaking heart, even when they started in the worst possible way. They married 6 months later, on that same stretch of Gulf Coast, under an open sky instead of guarded gates, Rosa crying harder than anyone in the front row, Danny walking Grace down an aisle lined with white flowers from her own shop, each arrangement hand-picked and grown with the same stubborn, dignified care she had carried through every hard year of her life, before a mistake in the dark had somehow, impossibly, led her home. When Raphael took her hands at the altar, his eyes, still black, still sharp, but no longer empty the way they had been the night she first saw him across a warehouse floor, were wet with tears he made no effort at all to hide. "You once told me," he said quietly, just for her, "that you should hate me. I remember." "I am the luckiest man alive," Raphael Castillo whispered, "that you never did." The ocean rolled in behind them, patient and endless, carrying away every hard night that had led them here, and somewhere in that steady, certain sound was the answer to the question that had started this entire impossible story, that sometimes the very worst night of your life is only the beginning of the best one, and sometimes the man who takes you by mistake is the only one who was ever going to know exactly how to hold on to you, once he finally, fully let himself try.